Good morning. Welcome to the Point. In just more than 3 weeks, Michigan will be the epicenter of presidential politics as the Michigan Democratic primary is on March 10th. We sat down this week to talk to the Michigan Democratic Party chairman, Lavora about how that process will work. I want to talk about this system that we have of caucuses and primaries. And I was kind of led to this from a conversation you and I had the day after Iowa. And of course, everybody had questions about Iowa, still do. For that matter. And you said, look, they were trying to do a lot of things. They were trying to put in more transparency and all of that. And you know the chairman of the Iowa Democratic Party and said, look, sure, trying to do the right thing. But it's difficult when you only do it once every 4 years. And for people who participate, they don't necessarily know all of the ins and outs. So even a primary, like we'll have here in a few weeks, will be confusing for some folks. Yes. And it's kind of a confusing way to start off an important process.
It is, indeed. And this idea that you show up on this one day in an odd time of the year, we're not accustomed to voting in March, and we're going to be voting on March 10th, and you've got to choose a party. And here in Michigan, we don't register with a party, so this choice of party is also different from what people are accustomed to doing. But they will choose a party, they will get a ballot for their party, and they will make their decision there. And then those votes will inform the folks who then go to the national convention. And in the end, if we're still working on this by the time of the national convention, choose our nominee.
And that is replicated all over the country.
All over.
Our vote here will come right after Super Tuesday.
Exactly.
Where a bunch of states will decide. And there are so many different facets of this. But let's just go back for a moment to Iowa, because if the process is confusing for us and we're doing things that we don't normally do, choosing a party, we're voting pretty much as normal, the same machinery and that kind of thing. But in Iowa, it's a completely different thing because you have to show up, stand around, go stand in that corner if you're for that candidate, in that corner if you're for that candidate. And then if you're not viable,
right,
you can go stand
in another corner.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And so just that process is a little bit clunky.
Yeah, the caucus process, which fewer and fewer states are choosing because it is a clunky process and because it is that 1 3-hour block of time on one day, as opposed to our multi-day now that we can vote absentee, our multi-day process. It's one night and you've got to be available that night. You have to have nothing go wrong in your life that blocks you from showing up for that caucus. And then you stand in your preferred corners. And then if you don't have the numbers to be viable, you have to move to another corner and choose someone else. And it was just funny if you watched it on TV and some of the interviews with folks, or folks like, how are you making your decision about where to go next? Oh, they look like they're having fun over there. Or my neighbor is over there. Or my neighbor came over and convinced me to move over. It's a very different process. And seems a little old-fashioned. They love it in Iowa and in other states. I just think that the better way to do this is the primary system that allows more people to participate.
And I should say, I don't want to be piling on Iowa because I've been there twice to observe their caucuses. And the brand of retail politics that you get in a state like Iowa is really not matched anywhere. Maybe New Hampshire, but Iowa gets it for a year and a half before they get started. And the fact is, they have done a pretty good job in the past, particularly for the Democratic Party, of predicting who the ultimate nominee is going to be. So I'm not piling on Iowa, it's just an interesting way to do it. Let's talk about something else. And you just brought this up. I think this is really interesting. We have a long time to vote now.
Yes.
We can vote for, 45 days?
Correct.
And so you've got this ballot, and I was just looking at it a moment ago, and for the benefit of our viewers, we're taping this in advance, so my numbers may be a little off. We don't know who else may get out of this race. But if my arithmetic was right, and reporters don't always get that right, but if it was right, I think there are about 16 spots on the Democratic ballot, including uncommitted. Right. By my estimation, there are only 8 of those candidates that are still in the race, and by the time Super Tuesday comes and goes, that number could be less. So one of the interesting things about this early voting is if people have already voted, it's not impossible that they didn't vote for somebody that's already out of the race.
That is correct.
Does that concern you?
Correct. A little bit. You know, my ballot sits on my nightstand waiting, right? I haven't voted it yet. I know that there are people who are already voting, and I love that. It's great that we can vote early. I know that here in Michigan, you can go get a new ballot, you know, if you want to make a change. Please clerks, don't panic. I'm not telling people to do that. But that is something people have done in the past and may do. I think folks should choose the one they love, vote for them, and be happy with their vote, right? And I feel good about the group of folks who are still in the race, and let's choose one of them and keep going.
Primaries, be it a presidential primary or the every 2-year primaries that you go through as a party, are fascinating for me to watch because A, I like seeing people participate. I like learning about candidates, particularly with term limits in the state. We have people coming up that I meet for the first time when they're running for state house. And so it's interesting, and it's really educational to get to know people. That's all the upside of the primary. Downside is that within the party, those candidates sometimes will inflict damage on the ultimate nominee. Same is true when you're running for president. So where are we now in terms of what's happening with these candidates? Because it hasn't been as raucous as it was for Republicans 4 years ago, but it's starting to get a little testy.
Right. I think that the primary process is a good one because it helps us learn more and more about the candidates. It helps the candidates try out their messages and get better and better at delivering those messages as they move through the process. And it helps all of us understand what the issues are that are important to our Democratic base. I do think all of our candidates are smart to think about the general election while they're in the primary. And that's all primaries up and down the ballot, right? Because whatever you say now sticks with you. You know this. And you shouldn't be running a separate race in the primary from what you would say in the general. Don't say something in the primary that you're not going to be able to stick behind in the general. All of that said, I think the primaries are a good exercise for candidates and a good way for us to find the best because they've made it through that primary process.
As I say, we come right after Super Tuesday, and there are a dozen or more on that Tuesday, and that will have some impact. But going back and thinking about the process, thinking about Iowa and New Hampshire, even Nevada, which has more diversity.
Yes.
But do you think, I mean, I know that we'd all love Michigan to go first, right? But do you think that given what this year looks like, that when you go to the DNC, when you have your big meeting and you guys are looking forward 4 years out, do you think you will consider the idea of having a different lineup of the way states might look without predicting what that might be?
I do. I think it's time for us to revisit that discussion. And this is a discussion the DNC has had in an ongoing way for years and years, cycle after cycle. And, you know, the New Hampshire chair will remind me over and over again that he's got a state law that says that he goes first. And I was like, well, but if I had a state law that said I go first? But we will continue that discussion, I think, as a national committee. I think it's important that we find a way to get diverse voices early. I think that we saw the loss of the diversity of some of our candidate pool because it's tough to get some traction in some of these states when you are a candidate of diversity and you're running in states that have very little diversity. I would love that. But all of that has to be balanced with the fact that you don't want a big, hard primary at the beginning, because that also winnows out people who struggle to fundraise, who struggle to get traction, who struggle to find grassroots opportunities early. So we've got to find a balance there that makes sense. And frankly, I think Michigan's like the perfect state for that.
Well, but you make a good point, because Iowa doesn't have any major media markets that you have to buy. You can do a whole lot of retail stuff. You can get in your car and drive around, shake hands at halls all over the state. So that really does give an advantage to somebody who isn't well financed to go in there. And obviously, again, that's in your best interest.
Yes, that's exactly right. That makes it much easier for folks to stay in the race longer because they can afford to actually run the race in Iowa. You park yourself in Iowa and you can go to people's homes and have those conversations, which is a terrific way to run a state house race.
When we fast forward now, we're past Super Tuesday and everybody's getting ready to go here. What you explained the process pretty well, but what do people need to know about being registered, or who do they need to contact if they want to get more information? Because this is a matter of, as you accurately pointed out, we're voting at a time we don't expect to, and it's going to surprise some people.
Exactly.
This will be kind of in their periphery. You and I live it every day, but people have lives. And so all of a sudden somebody's going to say, you're going to vote tomorrow, and they're going to be, oh my goodness.
Right. So first thing, primaries on March 10th. It's coming up, but you've got time to figure out your plan for voting. You can register to vote now on Election Day in Michigan. So if you show up at your clerk's office on Election Day because you haven't figured this out beforehand, you can register and vote right there at your clerk's office. But my suggestion is to get this done before March 10th so that you can register, vote, and get on with your life. And absentee is a great way to do that. We've got a program now that allows you to vote absentee, and everybody should take advantage of that so they don't have to worry about where they are or what's going on March 10th. We've got a hotline set up. We've got attorneys now working full-time, our voter protection team, and if folks want to dial 833-MI-VOTES, Folks will answer the phone and answer any questions they have about how they register, where they register, if they're registered, if they're eligible to vote. All of those questions can get answered.
And you should point out that laws were passed in the last election cycle make it much easier to do. So if anybody has a question, they can always still cast a provisional ballot, even if they can't figure it out at that moment.
Absolutely. But our goal is to get all those questions answered and get folks all set so that when they go in, they don't have to cast that provisional. They can vote the regular ballot.
One of the other things to keep in mind is that we may have a pretty good flood of candidates in here starting at about Wednesday the 4th, once they get everything wrapped up on Super Tuesday, because we're going to kind of be the prize of that day.
We are indeed the
10th.
prize. Yes, we are. We are the biggest and the best on the 10th. I expect that lots of folks, their campaigns are already setting up shop here, already have offices, already have staff on the ground, but there will be more of that, and I expect that there will be candidate visits for us during that period behind. I expect it to be kind of a whirlwind for us going up to that day.
Iowa and New Hampshire are already behind us. Nevada, South Carolina, and Super Tuesday are coming up. And then it's Michigan's turn. Just how important will Michigan be? We'll talk about that next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. We know how pivotal Michigan can be when it comes to presidential politics, and perhaps never more than in 2020. We talk about that now with the chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party, Lavora Barnes. Let's talk about how important Michigan is. And let's start first by talking about the selection process. We don't know what the field of candidates will look like by the time Super Tuesday is over. But we do know that Michigan will set the tone for that next wave. And that if you come in here as a candidate that maybe hasn't scored a win, but you've been good enough to be in the second or third position and you're moving forward, this could end up being a must-win for you, because it's going to be a must-win in November. We'll talk more about that in a minute.
That's exactly right.
But for the selection process, for the primary, how big are we?
We're huge. We're huge. And I think that once folks get past Super Tuesday, you're right. This is the moment that it's a make or break moment, right? If you've made it through Super Tuesday, Michigan becomes the place you go to get you close to the top, or perhaps even over the top, depending on where the delegate numbers are. So Michigan becomes a big deal for folks.
And again, so people remember, every 4 years, it's difficult, I think, for people who aren't fully immersed in this. The idea is about getting delegates to accumulate to take to the national convention.
Yes.
Some of those rules have been changed since the last cycle.
They have, yes. We've gotten rid of what we used to call a super delegate. So those are the folks who are automatic delegates to the national convention. So that they are now no longer called super delegates, although I think technically they were never actually called super delegates. But those folks now won't vote on that first ballot. The first ballot will be just the folks who've been elected at the local level to be delegates to the national convention. If there's a second ballot, let's knock on all the wood in the world that we don't need a second ballot, but if we do, that's when those voters will actually participate at the convention.
And so in addition to momentum, there are actual votes to help get you over the top here too. So it's kind of a dual thing. You want to win because that gives you momentum. It helps you raise money and it helps you move forward. But you want to win because you want to put those delegates in your pocket.
Exactly.
Right?
You have to do the delegate math, right? And make sure that you're adding up the number of delegates you need to get you over the top at the convention.
I want to talk about some of the efforts that you're taking, but I don't want to leave this conversation until we have the final conversation, and that is November.
Yeah.
For 28 years, Democrats won the state of Michigan. Every presidential candidate that the Democrats put up at their national convention won here until 2016. And I was here and I watched the response from the party and what the impact was on people, in some cases disbelief, and in other cases disappointment because they felt like there was opportunity lost. Republicans, on the other hand, saw this as a real milestone for them to win a state that they hadn't won in that same period of time and to win the presidency. My observation is we're going to be one heck of a battleground for 2020. I mean, is Michigan going to be one of the it states?
We are. I say to people, the eyes of the world are on us, right? Everyone is watching what happened in Michigan because everybody knows how close we were and what a surprise it was for folks that the Democrats did not win Michigan in 2016. And I have to say that when we woke up the next morning, we knew two things. One, we as a party had been caught flat-footed. We were not ready with a ground game to support our nominee. And number two, we could fix it. right? We knew how to fix it, and that's what we set about doing. We started 2017 building that ground game, and we've been working on it ever since. We're ready this time. It's not happening again.
I was at a meeting, a group of folks, and I was on a panel talking about politics, and somebody said, well, look, the Democrats had a great 2018. Can't we just assume from that going forward that they've got a leg up in 2020? And my answer was something to the effect of, I'm not sure in today's environment you can assume anything. Yes, Democrats were very successful in 2018, but I also know that there are scores of people on both sides that are working the ground here. So tell me what you have done. I mean, you can't tell me all your secrets, but tell me what you have done to reverse what you called being flat-footed in 2016.
The big difference for us is that we hired organizers to work on the ground in our communities around the state in 2017, and we've been working there ever since. We never stopped. And that's the result you saw in 2018 is due in large part to the ground game we built starting in 2017, and we continued to build in 2018, and we're building 2020 and 2018's image. We understand how important it is to have offices all over the state. We had 50 plus in 2018. We're looking to do the same. We had hundreds of organizers on the ground. We're going to do that again because we understand that the way we win this is with a grassroots movement of folks who are ready to get on the phones, get on the doors, and then get out to vote. So we've got a great plan, and we feel good about it.
And one of the things that people often laugh at when I say, but it is so true, it just is about who turns out to vote. I mean, it really is that game day choice of people to vote. Now, absentee voting, early voting, all that will be a game changer, and we'll see how that changes, right? But how much of your effort overall is about just building that list and making sure you can call somebody on Tuesday and saying, hey, today's the day?
A huge part of it, a huge part of it. And the thing we know now, I think I knew before, but we know now is that you can't show up in September and say, please vote. You have to be having these conversations with voters all the time, which is why we're on the ground and on the doors and on the phones having these conversations over and over again about the importance of voting and what Democrats will do for you. This isn't just about running against someone, but this is also about telling the story of what it means to be a Democrat and to vote for Democrats and how your life will be different when you elect Democrats to leadership positions.
You know, it's interesting, and I would have asked this earlier, but I was moving on. But since you brought that important point up, one of the things I heard in Iowa was when people were asking, how are you making your decision? They were saying, I want to go with whoever can beat Donald Trump. But it's going to be important that you have more than just a message of beating Donald Trump, because people do have issues.
That is exactly right. This is why we're thinking about how our Democratic candidates run in the image of Gretchen Whitmer, run the way Governor Whitmer ran. Talk to all the voters all over the state about the issues that are important to them, the issues they talk about at their kitchen tables, right? Does the economy work for me, or do I need 2 and 3 jobs to make sure I've got food on the table and I can pay for my prescription drugs? Is healthcare safe, or is this administration going to take away my pre-existing conditions and other health care? So those issues are the important issues that we'll be talking about and we'll continue to talk about, because you're right, it's not just about running against someone, it's about building a case for what's different about the Democrats.
Everybody wants their vote to count, and you have done something within the Democratic Party. It's called a voter protection unit.
Yes.
Tell me what that is and what you hope it will do.
Yeah, so generally in the general election, we will hire someone somewhere in September to build a voter protection team. And these are the team of lawyers and other volunteers who are poised to answer any questions about issues that are happening for voters either at the polling place or prior to election day. What we have decided is that because there's so many changes in our election law and there's such a possibility for voter suppression efforts from the other side, that we needed a team in place early. So we hired a voter protection director last year, and she now has a staff of 3, and we have thousands of volunteers poised to be available to be at polling places, to be on the phones for that hotline, and to support our voters to make sure every vote counts.
In addition to whatever misdeeds somebody might be engaged in, because of all the changes this year, there's probably going to be more confusion, because a lot of times what happens, and I will get the call on Tuesday, on the 10th, and somebody will say, you know, I just went to the polling places and they said I had to pick a Republican or a Democrat ballot, and I want them both.
Right.
I mean, there's always confusion.
Always.
But this year we got a lot more stuff going on.
This year we have so much stuff going on, and people have so many questions about eligibility. Can I vote absentee? Who can register late? Can my college student register? All of those questions, and all of our folks are poised to answer those questions, both at that hotline, which is 833-MI-VOTES, or on election day. If we've got questions, we'll be available for those too.
How do you expand your base? What are you doing to reach out to people who, look, there were people in Michigan, I am convinced, in 2016 who felt like maybe the process was a little rigged, and maybe their guy didn't get a fair shake, and maybe they would just stay home.
Yeah. So one of my jobs has been to travel the state and to go into any room where 3 Democrats will gather to talk about how important it is that we are unified as a party, and to be very clear to everyone how very neutral we are as a party this time. From the national level on down, we're all very conscious of this idea that we put our thumbs on the scale, which we did not here in Michigan. But that question is not a question, I don't think, for anyone, because we've been very clear that we are as neutral as we can be, and our goal is just to get good Democrats elected up and down the ballot, get as many folks out for that primary on March 10th. And so we're doing our best to sort of wrap our arms around all the Democrats. It's a big tent, right? And there's people who have support all over and people who are supporting candidates everywhere. I tell them all, fall in love with whoever you want in the primary, and then we're all going to fall in line behind the one for November.
25 years ago when I started covering politics in Michigan, it was a different ballgame on a lot of different levels. And I could assign many areas of the state for Democratic voters and other areas for Republican voters. Tell me what the demographic change looks like for the Michigan Democrat and for the Republican Party, because they've won in places that I would never have suspected that they would have won. Democrats are winning in places that historically you haven't won. How challenging is that, and how much of an opportunity is that?
It's a huge opportunity. We're thrilled with the movement we've seen. We're sitting here in Kent County. The movement we've seen in Kent County since I started working in Michigan has been huge. And the fact that we can contest here in Kent County in a very strong way, and think about Oakland County and the changes we've made in Oakland County. We now have an Oakland County executive who's a Democrat, and we thought we wouldn't have that seat for generations, right? And I guess we didn't for generations, but now we do. The changes are real, and the big thing for us is to take advantage of those changes by having our grassroots organization on the ground ready to go. And we're growing more areas like that all up and down the state. I was just in Grand Traverse County. We're going to take that county commission, I think. This is a big deal for us, the places that we're able to play now that we haven't played before. And that's part of our 83 county strategy. We will leave no stone unturned to find good Democrats who are ready to vote and ready to win.
And finally, this is a pretty generic question, but I think about this in terms of where we are in the state. We have divided government, and we saw last year that there were areas where there was cooperation and where there other areas that did not have cooperation. When this is all done, whatever the outcome, what role, if any, do parties, Republicans and Democrats, play in binding up a nation or an electorate?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people really get on fire about these things, and when the elections are over, there can be some pretty big rifts.
Some pretty big rifts. One of the things I talk about is that we every cycle talk about whoever we're running against as though they are the worst human in the world. And I think that we all need to take a look at the kind of rhetoric that we are using to talk about. Let's talk about issues. Let's talk about the real problems that are happening in this country rather than the personal attacks, because the personal attacks are what divide us as a nation. The attacks on entire races of people, entire genders, like that's not, there's no place for that, I don't think, in this country, and there's no place for that in our politics. And I think our parties need to step up and say to our candidates, this isn't acceptable, this isn't the way we're going to govern.
Of course, what happens on Super Tuesday could have a big impact on what happens here in Michigan on March 10th. It's something we'll be keeping a close eye on, and we'll have a final note when we come back to the point. Selecting a presidential nominee for the Democrats is the order of the day, and Michigan will play a large part in that. Fast forward to November, where Michigan once again will be a battleground state where Republicans and Democrats will fight out the 2020 election cycle. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, we'll be here to talk about that battle and whatever else is going on in the world of politics. I hope you'll join us right here to the point.